In 6.4, we're not going to learn any new factoring techniques, but we're going to put it all together and see how it can work and give you some tips on what to look for. So the strategy is, first of all, look for the greatest common factor. And sometimes we forget about that and make a lot of work for ourselves, but always try to look for the greatest common factor first. And then you're going to have some situations here. Maybe it's a trinomial. If it's a trinomial, then you have ideas like trial and error, AC method. Maybe it has a leading coefficient of 1. You can just do multiplying and adding. That's really kind of like a trial and error thing. Or maybe it's a perfect square trinomial. So sometimes, especially if the numbers are large, you might say, well, maybe it's a perfect square trinomial. Maybe it's a binomial. Maybe you only have 2 terms. If you only have 2 terms and it's going to factor after you take out the GCF, then kind of your choices are it's either the difference of squares, the sum of cubes, or the difference of cubes. And other than that, there aren't a lot of choices for the binomials, so it's going to be one of those special products if, in fact, it factors more. Sometimes it just factors with a GCF. And then third, maybe it has more terms. So maybe it's a polynomial, not a binomial or a trinomial, but larger polynomial, more terms. Well, it might be a grouping thing then. It's probably a grouping thing. Now, it might group 2 and 2, or it might group 3 and 3. So it might be 2 terms and 2 terms. That's the kind of grouping we kind of started out with. But we did have an example before where we grouped 3 together and then 1 was by itself. So those are kind of the options, the things that we're looking for. So let's go to an example now. We have this, and it's always going to say factor completely. So we have this polynomial. We're going to look for the GCF, which in this case, the GCF is 8y, because they're all divisible by 8 and they're all divisible by y. So we're going to factor out the 8y and get y squared plus 2y minus 3. Okay? So now inside the parentheses, what we have left here is a trinomial. So we're going to try to factor that trinomial. We have to try to factor it. And my idea would be, are there 2 numbers that multiply to be -3 and add to be 2? And if you can come up with 2 numbers that do that, then you can factor it. The leading coefficient here is 1. So I don't have to worry about the AC method or trial and error necessarily. I can just look for those numbers. So I'm going to need a 1 times a 3, but I need one of them to be negative. I'm going to want the 1 to be negative because -1 plus 3 equals 2. And -1 times 3 equals -3. So I always start with a multiplication, but we found them. It's these 2 numbers right here. Those will work. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the answer 8y, and then I'm going to have a binomial y minus 1 and a binomial y plus 3. So that -1 is right there and the 3 is right there. You could check this. That's going to work. Okay.